that is also another question that people have about the WBC. It's like the narrative is, do we have it right before and during spring training where people like pitchers aren't quite warmed up? Do we have it during the All-Star break where pitchers are warmed up and there's no like lead up to the season needed, but then it's like riskier for playoff teams because that could be it's halfway through the season? Or do you have it after the season like winter leagues, but then you get the issue like you said of like then you're just burning out arms after October into November of continuing to pitch like high leverage innings. So I don't think there's really like one foolproof answer. I think what we have right now is probably the best strategy of having it at like during spring training where there already is a little bit of an early ramp up, and that will minimize risk for teams because they don't have to worry about like halfway through the season like completely stopping and sending their pitchers to play for a different team. But of course there will be always some detractors saying that there should be a different time of the year.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of To the Show We Go. I'm your host today, Ed Hand. I know it's weird. I'm doing this without Parker, but it's what it is. I'm joined by a guy that if you're active on Twitter and were following the World Baseball Classic last year or even before that, and if you're interested in international baseball, he's somebody that you're probably familiar with. It's Shawn Spradling. How are you doing today, Shawn?
Doing well, Ed. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. Hopefully I can step in and fill Parker's spot for
Well, normally it's me and Parker ganging up on somebody, so I'm just sort of on my own right now. But if you want to, that'd be if you're like Parker, then we're going to be in good shape. But how are you doing today?
Man, I'm doing well. Just had a full day at work, but excited to talk some WBC.
Yeah, definitely. But just to give people some background if they're not familiar with you, who are you? What's your background?
Totally. Yeah. So I am on Twitter, like you said. For most people that would know my work, it's mostly from Twitter or X. I back in 2022. Before the WBC 2023 had started, I was really excited for the tournament because in 2017 it was absolutely electric. I think everybody started to fall in love with it for the first time in the US. And so I was excited for the new edition in 2023 when MLB had announced it the previous summer that it was happening. There was no news or no media coverage whatsoever, no conversation happening about the WBC a year, even just 8 months prior to the tournament. So I saw that there was a gap in the media world that needed to be filled. And I kind of took it upon myself to start doing some research, reaching out to some baseball federations around the world, different international leagues and players and coaches and personnel. Was eventually able to get enough of a knowledge of the tournament and the game around the world to where I just started making content on the World Baseball Classic and international baseball on social media. So that's what I do right now. I make content on the baseball world through an international lens. Mostly, for the most part, it's the World Baseball Classic. I do a full comprehensive coverage of all 20 countries that no one really does because like you got American media members talking about Team USA or the Dominican reporters talking about the Dominican Republic, Japan, the Japanese team. There's not really anyone in English that does a full coverage of all 20 national teams and all of the qualifiers. So there's a lot of people that are fascinated in those other countries' national teams. So I wanted to kind of help bring that to the baseball world.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a lot about that. But before we get to it, let's go back a little bit. 2017, I remember going and seeing it was the one time I've been to Fort Myers for spring training. And I got to see, I believe it was the Twins playing the Colombian national team, or it was something like that. And you're right,
Nice.
Back in 2017, nobody was really making a big deal out of it. It was supposed to be kind of like the World Cup of baseball, but the attention that it was getting certainly wasn't that. What happened in 2017 to change the narrative?
Yeah, a great question. And to put it as simply as possible, the USA won. In 2017, before that tournament, not many American fans really cared, if we're being like totally honest. Now, that's a completely different narrative around the world, depending on the country. So the reason I say that is because in Japan, in Korea, in Taiwan, in a lot of the Latin American countries, ever since the first inaugural WBC back in 2006, this has been their World Cup of baseball. It was created to be that, and it has been known by that and is seen as that. Like you see the viewership numbers every tournament. It's crazy in a lot of these different countries. American fans have been a little bit slower to get on board, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. But one big reason is because we're not used to international play being a normal part of sporting culture. Whereas in soccer, which is in a lot of these other countries, they're very used to soccer culture. That is like just as important, if not more important than club culture. So that's not something that American baseball fans were really used to. So I think it's taken a little bit of time to get used to the WBC, and seeing national team players from your teams all kind of conjoined into one national team. But in 2017, when they saw how much fun the tournament was and that we could actually win this thing, and it was like you had players like Adam Jones talking about how it was like one of the coolest experiences he's ever had, then American fans were like, oh, I see what's going on here. This is actually one of the coolest things ever. So that's what happened in 2017. And then 2023, it just grew exponentially from there as well.
Yeah, it seemed like bigger name players were really starting to join in on it. You had the thing that I always think of with the 2023 one was that final at bat with Shohei Ohtani against his at the time teammate Mike Trout, and it was like the best in the world versus the best in the world, and that was incredibly cool. Also, Trout was actually playing in the tournament, which was kind of wild. Because it seemed like for a while it was nobody that was really a big name was playing it. Certainly when it first started, and then obviously 2017, as you mentioned, Adam Jones, there were some other guys there. But 2023, it felt like it became this real honor to play for your country.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think it was like, I mean, and that last at bat, you're right, was just like any fan's dream. Like
it was iconic.
The year,
it was iconic.
The year before the tournament happened, we saw that both Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani would be playing, and immediately the conversation was like, oh, what if they got to play against each other? I mean, what if they got to play each other in the final? Like, what if Shohei were to pitch against Trout? What would happen? Like, that was already happening a year before. The fact that we actually got that, the last at bat of the tournament, was just like a dream for any international baseball fan. And while I will say that this was the most star-studded WBC that we've ever seen, I do push back slightly on the fact that we've not ever had big names in the tournament, because, and this does kind of go back to like other countries have always given their best. They've always, like, Miguel Cabrera played in like every WBC. You got a lot of like the Puerto Rican, the Dominican, the Venezuelan, the Japanese players. All of them have always really sent their best because that's their World Cup. I would say the one country that is the exception is the US. And I think it's because we're still getting used to this tournament and international play in general. And injury scares, just to put it frankly, like a lot of pitchers have been worried about injury. And so even in 2023, we saw all of the star, like we had the best lineup we've ever seen from Team USA, but we still didn't have the pitching. That's sort of the one thing that the US is holding back, that if they were to give their top tier pitchers, like they would be even better. But yeah, I think in 2023, we started to see like everyone fully buy in. Not only did Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani play, but Mike Trout and Mookie Betts are literally like advocating for the tournament, saying like, this next time in 2026, we are bringing the best. Like, we are already recruiting for this tournament. Like, we don't want to lose this thing. This is the most fun I've ever had in baseball, Trout said. So yeah, it's definitely a narrative shift.
Yeah, and it's definitely a way to grow the game also, because with some of these more, I guess, not obscure countries, but countries that you don't think of as being baseball hubs, like the Czech Republic or even Great Britain, like countries like that, they all have teams in this. It all, you know, like you're a kid that watches this, suddenly maybe you want to play baseball. So it seems like just for the game in general, it's a really good thing. But there is... Yeah. This is the thing that I go back to. And if you ask someone like my dad, who, you know, is from a completely different era, it's like, who cares? What if they hurt themselves for the season? And I think back to Jose Altuve broke his thumb or something like that. I forget if that was the exact injury, but he ended up missing the first 2 months of the season. So I guess my question is, say somebody ends up, like a star player ends up getting hurt for the season. Do you see that reversing the participation, or do you think that it's reached a point now where it's kind of every 4 years it's here to stay?
Yeah, that is probably the biggest question that is surrounding the tournament for a lot of fans, because it's like, oh, like what if, all the what ifs of like what happens if this player does get hurt. And there is like a real issue with like if a player does get hurt, that can very much affect their season. And we like obviously never want that to happen. There are like insurance is pretty difficult to get for a lot of players, especially pitchers in the WBC, because a lot of the teams either don't want to pay for the insurance for those players to get hurt, or it's just like too expensive for the player to cover themselves. So that's why a lot of the pitchers won't pitch in the tournament at this point. If I'm giving my personal opinion, I think that because of 2017 and 2023, we have seen that this is our sports World Cup, and there's not really anything that's going to reverse that. You ask like almost any Dominican player in the WBC in 2023, and this is an actual video that was posted by some Dominican reporters. They asked them if they would have preferred to win the World Baseball Classic or the World Series. And almost all of them said the World Baseball Classic, or at least a tie. And that to me shows like that, yes, like MLB is the pinnacle. It is the peak of baseball in the world. It's where the best of the best play. But that is also really like just where they're getting, it's their day job, you know, like that is what they're doing for a job. The World Baseball Classic is where the players play for their hearts and their family and why they're playing. And so I think having both is an incredible thing for baseball. I personally believe that the future of baseball is international and is global. So I don't see it going away anytime soon. I know that like, if we're going to talk about specifics, Mets fans are really hating the WBC right now because of Edwin Diaz. But like, if you ask him, like he's still considering playing in the WBC in 2026. Like that's how big of a deal it is for him to represent Puerto Rico. And so I think because you have all of the players on board and so many fans on board, I don't think the WBC is going anywhere. I think it's just going to continue to grow.
When you say the future is international play, do you mean like the World, like this being like the World Cup, or do you mean like it shifts so you have like Team Japan playing Team Korea and they're in the same division, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think both of those are possibilities. I think that the World Baseball Classic has shown that there is such an interest in baseball all around the world, even for American fans. And so, for example, one thing I mean by like the future of baseball is international. Like we see how big of a deal it is for opening day to be played in Japan or in Korea now. Like we're sending the Dodgers over to play in these other countries because it's like in Japan, they love baseball. In Korea, they love baseball. And so like having our teams go play over there, and then in turn also having some of those teams come play in the US in recent years, people love seeing that. Or like there are in my like niche international baseball loving world, there are so many fans calling for like an actual Champions League type tournament. I don't know if you follow soccer at all, but like where you get like the best team in each of these countries' domestic leagues to play against each other in a tournament. So you have like the Dodgers against whoever wins the Japan series or the Korea series. I feel like that might be a little bit farther off, but like people are talking about it all the time. People would love to see those teams match up against each other. And then of course the WBC, I think the WBC will grow into the World Cup of baseball. It's never going to be as big as the World Cup in soccer because just soccer is just so large and so accessible and so global, but it's the closest thing that we have in baseball. And as baseball grows in these countries, like you said, in Czechia, Great Britain's getting a lot better at baseball. In Africa, we're seeing a lot of like prospects from Africa. In Brazil, there's so many countries that are growing in baseball that the more baseball becomes played around the world, Travis Bazana, the number 1 draft pick, I think he's going to grow baseball in Australia exponentially. They already have their own winter league. I think that as we see it grow around the world, it will continue to be, we're going to continue finding ways to bring the baseball world together in these tournaments and competitions.
Yeah, the thing that I guess would be challenging with like a Champions League sort of tournament would just be burning people's arms out because the season ends and then you have like 4 or 5 months to kind of rest. Well, you're losing some of that rest. You're going to start guys getting hurt a little bit after that. So it's just I can see where it's like it becomes complex. But how cool would that be? Like, how
it would just be so cool.
Would that be?
Like, you'd have so many more examples of Shohei versus Trout. Like, all of those storylines would be crazy. And it is a little bit far-fetched right now. Maybe someday we get something like that. But that is also another question that people have about the WBC. Is like, the narrative is, do we have it right before and during spring training where people, like, pitchers aren't quite warmed up? Do we have it during the All-Star break where pitchers are warmed up and there's no, like, lead up to the season needed, but then it's like riskier for playoff teams because it's halfway through the season? Or do you have it after the season, like winter leagues, but then you get the issue, like you said, of like, then you're just burning out arms after October into November of continuing to pitch like high leverage innings. So I don't think there's really like one foolproof answer. I think what we have right now is probably the best strategy of having it at like during spring training where there already is a little bit of an early ramp up. And that will minimize risk for teams because they don't have to worry about like halfway through the season, like completely stopping and sending their pitchers to play for a different team. But of course, there will be always some detractors saying that there should be a different time of the year.
Yeah. So going to, I guess, what do you do during the in-between? Because right now we're in between World Baseball Classics, but I've been seeing you tweet a bit about qualifiers. So what's going on in between World Baseball Classics, and how does a team qualify for the World Baseball Classic?
Yeah, so in the in-between years, the way that it works for the teams is, so historically the World Baseball Classic is constructed to be played every 4 years, just like the World Cup or the Olympics. It's changed a little bit because of COVID. It's kind of pushed everything back to 2023, and then to get back on track on schedule, they're condensing it to every 3 years. So because of that, we had the tournament in 2023, nothing in 2024, and then in 2025 we have qualifiers. 2026 is the next full main tournament. So this year in 2025, I forgot what year it was for a second, we have WBC qualifiers. And the way that works is right now, there are going to be 8 total teams competing against each other to qualify for the main tournament. And they're in 2 different brackets. So one will be in Tucson, Arizona, and the other one in Taipei, Taiwan. And so so it's just like a round robin. Once you get to the end of the tournament, the top 2 teams from each bracket, so 4 total teams, will qualify for the main tournament. And then they'll play again in 2026. And then in the WBC, the way that it worked in 2023 was the worst team of every pool was then relegated back to qualifiers, and everyone else automatically qualified. But those bottom 4 teams, like Colombia, like China, have to re-qualify again.
Gotcha. And are there going to be more teams in this tournament, or is it going to be the same amount? Like, what's the amount for every tournament so far?
So it has expanded as time has gone on. I'm going to have to fact check this, but I think in 2006 and 2009 there were 16 teams or so. Right now we have 20 total teams in the WBC, and in qualifiers there's 8. So you have the 4 teams that were relegated, and then 4 additional teams competing for those final 4 spots.
Gotcha. So who are the 8 teams that are going to be duking it out for these 4
Yep.
spots? Half of them will get in, and half of them try again in 4 years.
Exactly. So in Tucson, what we're going to have is China, Germany, Brazil, and Colombia. And then in Taiwan, in Taipei, it's going to be Taiwan, Spain, Nicaragua, and South Africa.
That's really like what. So of those teams, which are considered to be the favorites?
Yeah, the favorites. There are a couple heavy favorites. That's a good question because Taiwan they're a huge baseball country. Actually, for those that don't know, baseball is Taiwan's national sport. So they have their own full-fledged like baseball culture. I don't know if you got to watch any of the games in Taiwan in the last.
We had a guy that named Rio Gomez who actually pitched for Colombia in the World Baseball Classic. He pitched in Taiwan this past season and was just talking about how like intense the culture is there.
Yeah, and he was lights out too. I know that once I think this season his numbers were incredible in
Yo,
Taiwan in the CPBL.
yeah, he was fantastic. I think he was a little disappointed because his last outing, his ERA went above 1. So just for
Yeah,
the stat line, he was a little bummed out about that. But
uh,
yeah, he had a great season there.
yeah, but to your point, Taiwan is very much the like a favorite in that pool. They recently just won the Premier 12, which is like another international team tournament in the fall. And so they're a team that will very much be competing. They're the home team because it's going to be in Taipei. So I very much expect them to qualify for the main tournament. Let's see. Nicaragua is another team that has a lot of prospects and a couple major leaguers that I think will be really good. Colombia is another team that has a bunch of major league players. They have a great national team. So those are the favorites. I think of the teams that are left, Brazil is really interesting. They have a lot of prospects and then a couple players in NPB in Japan that are playing that might be able to help them out. And then Spain for me is a big question mark because, and this goes into a completely different conversation, but because the Cuban national team is so polarizing and so politically charged, I guess. A lot of Cuban players don't want to play for Cuba, but a lot of Cubans are of near enough Spanish descent to where they can actually
Interesting.
play. They can play for Spain. And so we might see a lot of Cubans and Dominicans and on the Spanish national team to make that team up, which could very much help them qualify.
So, as far as who can play for these teams, I'm just thinking of, like, just for instance, Jan Gomes is Brazilian. Would he be able to play for the Brazilian team?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He would be one of their best players for sure.
So if you're on a 40-man roster, or you can just play for whoever.
Totally. Yep. Even if you're on a 40-man roster. So a couple of the names that like you could see now, like it depends on the players and the teams. Like a lot of players don't want to play in qualifiers, but want to play in the main tournament if they qualify. A couple of those names that we could see in qualifiers, or if they actually qualify, we'll definitely see in the tournament. My guess, at least, is so Max Kepler could play for Germany. He's literally from Germany. But then you have guys on the other side that are just of heritage of these countries. So Bo Bichette, for example, his mother is Brazilian. So he could literally play for Team Brazil. And his brother, I actually tweeted this out recently,
Yeah, I
Dante
saw
Bichette
that.
Jr., he has said that he's going to play for Brazil as well in the qualifiers.
Yeah, I think he was a former first-round pick, wasn't he?
He was, yeah. And he was a top 10 Yankees prospect at one point. And then hasn't played in affiliated ball in a couple years, but he's coming back for qualifiers.
Yeah, it's always cool seeing that too, because I remember there was a guy on Israel. I think his name was Shlomo Lepel or Lopez or something like that. He was like a 43-year-old dude with like a gold tooth that was just like that was pitching for them. So you kind of get a lot of these characters of the game competing in it. And I remember also the Czech Republic. It was like Eric Sogard and like a bunch of just like engineers and chemistry teachers and stuff like that. Do you think are a lot of the teams like are they rosters that are like that where you have a couple of riggers, but then it's just people that grew up that happen to play baseball and it's like this obscure sport in that country?
Yeah, I mean that is one of the coolest things about the WBC, in my opinion, is because you get the entire spectrum of baseball players. You get from USA and Dominican Republic and Japan. You get Shohei Ohtani and Mike Trout, all the way down to like guys who, like you said, have day jobs that are teachers in high school or are plumbers or are electricians in the Czechia team. So cool. And it really is dependent on the country. A lot of these countries are very new to baseball or just don't have the history or have the developed domestic talent to actually like fully fill out a roster. So for example, like Italy is a really interesting one because since WBC eligibility is sort of tied to citizenship laws in that country, Italian citizenship is easy to get if you have like a man that's Italian somewhere in your line you can trace it back to. Like you can play for Team Italy, so you got a lot of Italian Americans playing for the team. Whereas Czechia, almost every player on that team was born in Czech Republic, and they are actually from Czechia. They had a couple, like you said, Eric Sogard played for them, but for the most part, it was homegrown, which was also really inspiring. inspiring and really cool to see. So it really just depends on the country.
What's been in the history of the tournament? What's been the biggest underdog story? Like, what's their like cool runnings? What's the cool runnings team? I guess.
Oh man, that is a great question. Let me think. I mean, I would say the Czech Republic is way up there. Like that will go down as one of the coolest stories in WBC history because they not only were they competing in qualifiers with that team full of like some of their players after they qualified for the WBC, the next morning they woke up and like went to work. Like that's just it's so cool to think about. And then a couple months later, they were pitching against Shohei Ohtani in the Tokyo Dome. Like that's just the coolest story ever. I would say they're up there. Let me think. Nicaragua qualified. They have a great baseball history, though. Great Britain. I mean, in 2023, they were a very young team. They had a lot of prospects. They're really interesting. I'll have to go back and think of other big like Cinderella stories. There is, and this is one of the hardest memories for Dominican fans in the WBC. But back in I think 2009, the Netherlands beat them in one of the they eliminated them from the WBC, I believe, and that was a huge underdog story because the Netherlands was nowhere near the Dominican Republic at the time. So that's the only one that I can really think of in previous tournaments.
Yeah, though sometimes it's funny because you don't think of like Aruba or Curacao being associated with the Netherlands, but they would. I don't think Andrew Jones was on that team, but technically they would have access to some of these guys if they were from those countries.
Exactly, because they're Dutch territories, and so they're technically still Dutch. They're Dutch citizens, and so a lot of the players that play for Netherlands are from Curacao, from Aruba, a lot of those countries.
Now, has anybody just based off of their World Baseball Classic ever gotten a contract with a team after that? Like they got even a minor league contract?
Absolutely. That's a great question too, because one of the coolest stories personally from the 2023 WBC was that exact thing happened almost in like a storybook fashion. So the Dominican Republic was playing against Nicaragua in the pool stage, and Nicaragua was down by like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 runs. So in the last inning, they brought in one of their young pitchers to face the Dominican Republic just to get him like an inning, just kind of burn an inning. His name was Duque Hebert. And I think he was probably 20, 21. He came in to face, I think it was Juan Soto, Julio Rodriguez, and maybe Rafael Devers or Manny Machado. I don't remember.
That is a stacked lineup.
No big deal. Just 3 perennial all-stars. And he comes in and goes 3 up, 3 down. I think he goes 3 up, 3 down, or maybe 2 strikeouts, ground like something into the outfield. Anyways, he got all 3 out. And after that game, since he was so impressive, a Tigers scout literally approached him and offered him a contract on the spot. And so now he is a Tigers prospect in their organization.
That's really cool. It's also, I just had this thought. That's terrifying to think that that's like $1 billion plus in players that this guy had to go through.
Yeah, and he just did it like it was nothing. This like 20-year-old kid who had never played in the U.S., he played in like the Nicaraguan league. And all of a sudden, he's striking out guys like Juan Soto like it's nothing and gets a contract on the spot. And that's, I think, also another one of the coolest things about the WBC is you get storylines like that you don't get in just like the regular everyday like MLB season because everyone knows the prospects. No one's really watching like the lower levels of the minors to see guys like this. But since they're now on the global stage, you see guys like him pitching against the best of the best, and stories like this come out of it. Yeah,
though, like I feel like that's how you get interested in also is like you highlight those stories and you should like because it's good for even if you're looking at this from an MLB centric perspective, it's kind of like a highlight show of these guys. If they're facing your superstars and they're getting these guys out, I mean, you might never have seen this random kid from Nicaragua pitch, but here he's doing it against the toughest possible competition.
Yeah,
I feel like there really isn't just from a scouting perspective, there isn't a better way to do it.
Oh yeah, and you don't get like when you send scouts over to a different country, you don't a lot of the time have the advanced like analytics or like systems like hit tracks to be able to see like how fast is this guy pitching, what's the rotation on the ball, how hard is he hitting the ball, what's his like swing speed. You're going to get all of that in MLB stadiums, and so it really is like a great opportunity for scouts as well to see these players.
So when are qualifiers actually happening?
Yep. So the qualifiers for this next tournament will be in just like a month and a half. They're at the end of February and the beginning of March.
Gotcha. And how long do they go on for?
It's about a week. I'm looking at the website right now, and the ones in Tucson start February 21st and end the 25th. So yeah, just under a week. And then in, let me see, actually that may have been the one that was the one in Taiwan. And then in Tucson, the first game is March 2nd, goes to March 6th.
And are they all going to be televised? Like, are they going to be on MLB Network or whatever?
They haven't announced anything publicly yet for this tournament, but if we go back to 2022, what they did is just live streamed everything on YouTube. So it was really easy to find for free. I think they also did it on WBC.com, but it's so easy to just go to YouTube and watch a live stream, which I highly, highly recommend doing. Those were some of the most fun games in 2022 to watch. And like, no one's really watching them because it's not even the WBC. It's just qualifiers of these countries that you probably never watched play baseball. So it's like a more niche community of like international baseball fans watching this and like talking in the comments. So if you get a chance to watch, it's a lot of fun to just like watch these teams play.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to have to do that. It sounds super interesting. But what's something that you've learned about international baseball that the average MLB fan, or even just like the average, like say you're a fan of Korean baseball, but you're not following like international competition? Like what are some things that people wouldn't expect about it, or that you didn't expect about it?
I think that there's definitely a couple of things that learning international baseball has taught me about baseball, about the world, about myself even. Like there's some like deeper things that I've learned about these different cultures. I think that the first thing that comes to mind for me, though, is that these baseball countries that play all around the world are also distinct from each other. They're not just like all a microcosm of like the baseball that we see every day in MLB. For example, it's so fascinating to me that baseball in Japan has existed completely independent from MLB and from American influence for over 100 years. Like they have built their entirely own baseball culture, baseball style, that if anything happens to MLB and it, for some reason, God forbid, it just like went away, it would not affect NPB at all. Like they would continue to thrive because it's so popular there and they have their own style. That's pretty fascinating to me to see in a lot of these countries, that it's just like they're so different from each other. And in that same way, it's really interesting to see what certain countries do well or better than other countries. So I was just like researching and looking into different countries and what position groups they kind of specialize in. And for example, randomly, Venezuela has like an incredibly stacked depth chart of catchers. They have like 6 or 7 different catchers in MLB and a bunch in the minor leagues that are just like all elite, or like coming up through the minors. They were just all like top prospects. And I don't really know what exactly that is about, but somehow they develop catchers really, really well. Or for Japan, like they are always incredibly meticulous and fine-tuned at the mechanics of the game. So they're always really good at defense, really good at pitching. It's pretty fascinating to see certain countries specialize in different parts of the game.
That's interesting, because I think about going back to Curacao. You had Andrew Jones coming from there, Andrelton Simmons coming from there. Now Cedar Rafaela is considered an elite defensive prospect, and another guy from Curacao. I do wonder how much of it is coincidence and how much of it is how the game is taught and how it's played there. Like that's really interesting. And it would be like, what are there any other things? Like, what do the Netherlands do exceptionally well?
So, and the Netherlands is such an interesting case too, because they're made up of all of the Dutch territories and Dutch countries. I think it's funny, if you look at their team, more players are born in Curacao, like their national team, more players are born in Curacao and Aruba than in the Netherlands. So it's kind of hard to get a gauge on what they do well. I know they have a lot of really good pitchers in the Netherlands, and the Netherlands actually, they do have their own domestic league. It's not to the same level as like an NPB or a KBO or a CPBL, but they do have their own league that has a lot of history. And in Europe, I would say that the Netherlands is one of the very top countries historically, that they've developed their own league and own style of play over the years. And it is heavily influenced by Curacao and Aruba. So I think because they all kind of play together so well as a Dutch team, that's what makes them really exciting to see, because you got players that have been born in completely different parts of the country, but because they speak the same language and they play the same style of baseball, they play really well together.
But it's interesting because, say, the States, I mean, that's a huge country, but is the style of play in California going to be any different than the style of play in Florida? I don't know. I haven't really thought about it before.
Yeah, I would love to do research on that to see, like, I don't know, like I'm in Texas, like what do Texas high school, like when they go to MLB, what do the Texas players do well? Like, are they power hitters? Are they like more contact hitters? Are they good pitchers? I would be fascinated to do like a study on that, or to see one even more so on like countries, to see like what these countries develop really well. Like Dominicans, they have like a million shortstops that are just elite level. And so, or like USA is second to no one in power hitters. Like we develop power hitters better than anyone else. Japan has like one or two big home run hitters, and that's pretty much it. They're mostly like more sound contact hitters, gap to gap. So yeah, it's really interesting to me, that part of the game.
Yeah, that's why when you see guys play internationally in Asia, you'll have like they'll be after the big power hitters. They're not looking for singles hitters. They're not looking for somebody that's going to be a good contact hitter. They want the home runs there because they don't develop it as well. That is really interesting. So yeah, we're at a little over a half hour now. Is there anything that you I'm sure you've done more like other podcasts before. Is there anything that you've wanted people to ask you before that they haven't?
Oh yeah, that is a good question. Well, actually, let me ask you this and see. Maybe I can answer in response. What is it about international baseball that you have questions about? What or about the World Baseball Classic specifically? Is there anything that like is confusing?
The questions that I've had about it, which is about the qualifiers and that stuff, you've answered all of that stuff for me. But I guess
for the World Baseball...
okay, wait, here's one.
Yeah.
How do you qualify for qualifiers? Because I've heard there's like a Pakistani team. There are teams. There's that league that started in Dubai, so I'm sure there are countries around there. How do you qualify for the qualifiers?
Yeah. So this is getting a little bit more into the like kind of into the weeds of like even the international baseball niche world this is a conversation that is always had among that community. There's not really an answer to that. It's a little bit more like invitation to the qualifiers, unless there's some rules internally that MLB and WBSC have talked to different federations about. There's not really any way to qualify other than like being a good enough baseball country, or I guess just like putting yourself out there to get in qualifiers. So yes, there is a Pakistani team, and it's kind of tough because like the Philippines was supposed to be in qualifiers in 2022, and then all of a sudden they weren't anymore, and then Argentina took their place. So that's a little bit of a gray area. It is pretty internal with MLB. I wish there were more answers and a little bit more transparency into that process. I think people would love to know what the criteria to qualify are. But it's a little bit fuzzy. But Pakistan does have a team, Baseball United in Dubai. I actually got to go to that league, the first tournament they ever had, the showcase, and cover it for the league. And it was awesome. It was so much fun to watch. You had so many MLB stars that were there like playing or coaching in it. So it was really cool to see.
What's the most obscure country that has a team?
What is the most obscure country? Let's see. I think that, Pakistan, when they first competed I think they were in qualifiers in 2017. That was a big shock. because you don't ever expect baseball to be played like enough to have a national team from the Middle East and South Asia. I think that even in Brazil, it is a huge country, but my wife is Brazilian, and we've talked about this a lot, and with a lot of her family and friends, like most Brazilians don't even know that they have their own national team. They're like, wait, we play baseball and we're like kind of good at it. What is that from? Who's Jan Gomes? So there are those, like Argentina had one team, had a national team in 2022, was in qualifiers. Yeah, I'm trying to think of who the most obscure team would be. Czech Republic would have been one.
Yeah,
like
they're
the
not
fact
obscure
that they were
anymore,
able
though.
that they were able to qualify, and all of a sudden, oh wait, now it's like it's a pretty big sport in their country. Like it's growing like crazy. I think it's in the top 30 sports in the country, and it will continue to grow. Now that they've qualified and automatically qualified for 2026, they don't have to worry about requalifying. Now all they got to do is recruit and work on being the best they can be for the tournament.
That's really cool. But so they stop being obscure once they have a little bit of success, basically.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's any, because I know with Pakistan they play cricket there, and I assume that there's some of the skill set can kind of fall over into the other sport. So I wonder if like India or somebody like that'll end up having.
I would love to see that. I think that there are a couple players of Indian descent that could really help the national team, and with that bat and ball sport of cricket, like you would think that there'd be a huge crossover. Like they have the hand-eye coordination to hit the ball, or pitchers like the bowlers, they have the mechanics. And so I would assume that there would be a lot of players that could cross over really well.
It'd be really interesting to see. Well, you've given us a lot of your time, and really appreciate you coming on to talk about this with us. Where can people find you if they want to read your content?
Yeah, so what I do primarily right now is social media content. I did write a little bit last year for Pitcher List, and I loved it, but I just haven't had the time with getting a new job and like family stuff this year. But so right now, what I do is social media content, full coverage of the World Baseball Classic. If you want to know anything about the World Baseball Classic, I will be making a video about it. I've heavily focused on Twitter for the last tournament, but this year I'm going to continue doing Twitter, but heavily shift focus over to Instagram and TikTok as well. So just for the video content, I think that there's a big space for like visual video coverage of the WBC that isn't being done right now. So yeah, Shawn Spradling across socials. Shawn_Spradling is my tag. You can find me on pretty much any platform, and feel free to reach out to me if y'all have any questions. Any listeners here, if you have any questions about the WBC, about international baseball, I'd be happy to like answer them and to share them in content.
People are probably going to take you up on that, so just keep an eye on your DMs are about to blow up. But
good. I'm excited.
Again, we really appreciate you being on. We'll have to have you come back when we get a little bit closer to the tournament.
Absolutely, Ed. Yeah, it's gonna be a ton of fun. I would recommend everyone watch World Baseball Classic qualifiers in February and March. It's gonna be some of the most fun baseball you've ever watched. And yeah, as we get closer to the tournament, we're really gonna ramp things up and have a lot more content. And I'll have to come on for sure again when we get a little bit closer to the tournament.
Hell yeah. We'll see you all next time.